The sun had just begun its descent, casting a golden glow over the bustling city. Thomas Carter, a man known for his vast wealth and unyielding control, stood on the balcony of his penthouse, gazing out over the urban sprawl. His world was one of luxury, where the problems of others seemed distant and almost abstract. Yet today was different. Today, Thomas had decided to step beyond his insulated bubble. His charitable foundation had identified a family in desperate need of help. A single mother and her young daughter, struggling to make ends meet. It was an effort to counterbalance the excesses of his world, an attempt to reconnect with the humbling realities that seemed so far removed from his daily life. He arrived at their modest home, a stark contrast to his opulent residence. The neighborhood was quiet, with a few children playing in the streets and worn-out houses that told stories of better days gone by. As Thomas approached, the sight of the small, weathered house struck him with a pang of realization. It was a far cry from the marble floors and crystal chandeliers he was used to. Inside, Maria, the mother, greeted him with a mixture of hope and skepticism. Her eyes, weary yet bright, met Thomas's with a guarded curiosity. Her little girl, Lily, clung to her skirt, peeking out with innocent eyes that seemed to reflect a mixture of wonder and apprehension. Thomas began to speak, his voice steady but carrying the weight of his intention. He explained that he wanted to offer financial support, enough to relieve their burdens and provide them with some stability. Maria listened intently, her face a canvas of emotions ranging from disbelief to cautious optimism. The offer was generous, but Thomas could sense an underlying hesitation, a skepticism born from years of hardship and broken promises. As he handed over the check, Thomas couldn't help but feel a pang of discomfort. He had done similar things before, but something about this encounter felt different. The modesty of their home, the tired lines on Maria's face, and the tiny fingers of Lily grasping at her mother's leg seemed to amplify the disparity between their worlds. Thomas spent some time with them, sharing tea and conversation. He observed the small joys in their lives, Maria's pride in her daughter, the warmth in their modest living room despite its lack of luxury. It was an immersion into a reality that was both foreign and strikingly poignant. Before he left, Thomas noticed an old photograph on the wall, a sepia-toned image of a man he didn't recognize, standing proudly with a woman and a child. The family's resemblance to that photograph was undeniable, but Thomas didn't press for details. He left with a sense of unease, a feeling that there was more to this family than met the eye. As he drove away, the city lights began to twinkle against the encroaching twilight. The image of the photograph lingered in his mind, casting a shadow over his thoughts. There was something hauntingly familiar about it, a connection that eluded him but demanded his attention. The feeling was unsettling, and as he glanced back at the modest house shrinking in the distance, he couldn't shake the sense that this encounter was only the beginning of a deeper, more complex journey. The transition to the next chapter was already set in motion. The curiosity sparked by the photograph would soon unravel, leading Thomas into a world where the lines between charity and personal history would blur, revealing connections he never anticipated. Days turned into weeks, and the initial sense of curiosity Thomas Carter felt about the family slowly grew into an obsession. The photograph from the modest house haunted his thoughts, creating a dissonance with the polished, orderly world he inhabited. It was a mystery he couldn't ignore, an itch that no amount of opulence could scratch. On a crisp morning, Thomas decided to revisit the neighborhood. He told himself it was to check on Maria and Lily, to ensure the aid was helping as intended. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. He needed to uncover the connection he sensed, to validate the uneasy feeling that had settled in his gut. Arriving at the house, Thomas was greeted with the same warm, though modest, hospitality. Maria welcomed him with a reserved smile, and Lily, now a bit more accustomed to his presence, ran up with a shy wave. They were still struggling but seemed to be managing a little better, thanks to the support he had provided. During his visit, Thomas was drawn once again to the photograph that had intrigued him so much. He casually asked Maria about it, his tone light, trying to gauge her reaction. Maria's face tightened slightly, and she avoided eye contact, her demeanor shifting from openness to guardedness. "That's an old family photo," she said, her voice steady but lacking warmth. "It's from a time we don't talk much about." Thomas's curiosity was piqued. He noted the change in her tone and the subtle discomfort that crossed her features. He decided to probe further, delicately, as he engaged in small talk, trying to glean more information. Maria mentioned that the photograph belonged to her late grandmother, who had always been a mysterious figure in their lives. After his visit, Thomas couldn't shake the sense of unfinished business. He returned to his sleek, modern home, but the luxury around him felt like a facade, a veneer that couldn't mask the growing intrigue about the photograph. He began to dig deeper into his own records, searching for any clues that might connect his family's history to the one Maria had hinted at. Late into the night, surrounded by files and old documents, Thomas stumbled upon something that made his heart race. An old family ledger, passed down through generations, contained names and dates that mirrored those in the photograph. The similarities were too striking to ignore. A name, a date, a place that resonated with what he had seen. The realization hit him like a wave. The connection was not just a casual coincidence. It was something more profound. He was dealing with a lineage and a past that intersected with his own in ways he hadn't anticipated. It was as if the past had reached out from the shadows to touch his present. Determined to uncover the full story, Thomas resolved to learn more about the family's history and the enigmatic photograph. The hidden secrets of the past were slowly unraveling, and he was drawn further into a web of mystery that promised to reveal truths about himself he had long buried. As he prepared for his next visit, Thomas's thoughts were a mix of excitement and trepidation. He knew that each step closer to the truth would uncover layers of complexity and challenge his understanding of both the past and the present. The transition to the next chapter was set. The journey into the heart of the mystery was just beginning, and Thomas was on the brink of a revelation that would change everything. Thomas Carter's anticipation was palpable as he arrived at the modest house once more. The investigation into the photograph had led him down a labyrinth of records and connections that seemed to twist and turn, revealing more questions than answers. His curiosity was now a powerful driving force, and he was determined to confront whatever secrets lay hidden. The sky was overcast, casting a muted light over the neighborhood. The usual warmth of Maria's home seemed to be cloaked in a somber veil today. As Thomas entered, he was greeted by the familiar sight of Maria and Lily. The atmosphere was more subdued than usual, and the weariness in Maria's eyes was more pronounced. After exchanging pleasantries, Thomas steered the conversation towards the photograph again, his tone casual but his mind racing. Maria hesitated before speaking, her gaze dropping to the floor. "That photograph," she began slowly, "is from a time I never really understood. It was always shrouded in mystery." Thomas leaned in, his interest piqued. "What do you mean?" he asked gently, trying to draw out the details. Maria took a deep breath, her fingers fidgeting with the edges of her worn-out apron. "It's an old family secret," Maria said quietly. "My grandmother never talked much about it, but I've heard stories of a connection that goes back many years." Thomas's pulse quickened. A connection? To what? His voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of his mounting curiosity. Maria hesitated, her eyes flicking towards the photograph on the wall as if seeking the right words. "My grandmother was involved in something important. She once mentioned a man who could have changed everything, but she never said more." Thomas's mind raced. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the picture was still incomplete. He decided to push a little further, hoping to extract more details. "Do you have any documents, letters, or anything else that might shed light on this connection?" Maria's eyes widened, and she nodded slowly. "There might be some old letters in the attic. I've never really looked through them, but they might be what you're looking for." With a mixture of excitement and trepidation, Thomas followed Maria up the creaky stairs to the attic. The space was dimly lit and filled with the musty smell of old papers and forgotten memories. Maria rummaged through a pile of dusty boxes and eventually produced a small, leather-bound box, its surface cracked and worn with age. Thomas's hands trembled slightly as he opened the box, revealing a collection of letters and documents, yellowed with time. He carefully selected a few and began to read. As he scanned the faded ink, the words seemed to jump off the page, revealing a story of betrayal, lost love, and a connection that intertwined his own family with Maria's. One letter in particular caught his eye. It was addressed to a man named Edward Carter, a name strikingly similar to his own. The letter spoke of a secret meeting, a broken promise, and a child who was hidden away. Thomas's heart pounded as he read the final lines, which suggested that the writer had been involved in a tragic event that had far-reaching consequences. The revelation hit him with the force of a tidal wave. The connection between his family and Maria's was not just historical. It was deeply personal. The letter revealed that his own lineage was intricately linked to the family he had tried to help, and the photograph was a key to understanding this hidden chapter of his past. Thomas closed the box with a heavy sigh, his mind reeling from the unexpected truth. The discovery was profound and unsettling. As he descended the stairs, Maria and Lily waited below, oblivious to the gravity of the secrets now unveiled. Thomas knew that the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges. The unexpected revelation had changed everything, setting the stage for a deeper exploration of the tangled web of history that now connected him to Maria and her family. The transition to the next chapter was imminent, and the story was about to take a turn that would uncover even more profound truths. Thomas Carter's footsteps echoed in the quiet hallway as he walked down the long corridor of his office building. The city beyond was bathed in the hues of dusk, but Thomas's mind was consumed by the revelation he had uncovered. The connection between his family and Maria's was more than a historical footnote. It was a tangled narrative that demanded resolution. As he approached his office, Thomas's assistant, Rebecca, greeted him with a concerned look. "Mr. Carter, we've received some troubling news," she said, her voice laced with urgency. "There's been some pushback from the board regarding your recent activities. They're questioning the motives behind your involvement with that family." Thomas's heart sank. The board had always been supportive, but the unexpected revelation had shifted the ground beneath him. "What are they saying?" he asked, trying to mask his growing unease. Rebecca handed him a stack of documents. "They're concerned about the financial implications and the impact on your public image. They're also worried about the connections you're making. They feel it might be compromising your position." Thomas scanned the documents, his frustration mounting. The board's resistance was fueled by their own concerns of reputation and power, not by the genuine interest in uncovering the truth. Their doubts were an obstacle he hadn't anticipated. Determined to move forward, Thomas made his way to his office. The large glass walls of the room offered a panoramic view of the city, but tonight, the view did little to soothe his agitation. He needed to act quickly to protect his investigation and maintain control over the situation. As Thomas delved into his research, trying to piece together the final elements of the family's history, he began to face other forms of resistance. Reports and inquiries about the family's background were being stonewalled. Records that should have been accessible were mysteriously withheld, and his efforts to contact historians and genealogists were met with unexplained delays. His frustration reached a boiling point when he received a warning from an anonymous source. The message was brief but clear: "Stop digging. Some secrets are better left buried." The warning was a chilling confirmation of his fears. Someone or some group wanted to keep the connection between his family and Maria's concealed. But who had the power and motive to interfere so forcefully? Despite the mounting pressure, Thomas decided to continue his investigation. He reached out to Maria, hoping to glean more information directly from her. The atmosphere was tense when he arrived at her home, a palpable sense of discomfort hanging in the air. Maria greeted him with a wary smile. "Mr. Carter, is everything all right?" she asked, her eyes betraying a hint of anxiety. Thomas chose his words carefully. "I've encountered some difficulties in my research. I believe there are important truths that need to be uncovered, and I need your help to do that." Maria's expression hardened. "I've had some visitors asking questions about us," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. They seemed very insistent and not very friendly. Thomas's pulse quickened. It was clear that Maria and her family were being targeted in ways he hadn't anticipated. The resistance was not just from his world. It was reaching into the lives of those he was trying to help. As he left Maria's house, the weight of the situation pressed heavily on his shoulders. The resistance he faced was a stark reminder of the challenges ahead. His quest for the truth had become a battleground, fraught with obstacles and hidden agendas. The next chapter of the journey would demand more than just perseverance. It would require navigating a web of distrust and interference that threatened to derail everything he had worked for. The transition into the next chapter was imminent. The resistance had intensified, and Thomas knew that uncovering the truth would require navigating a treacherous path fraught with danger and deception. The journey was far from over, and the stakes were higher than ever. The early morning mist clung to the city streets as Thomas Carter stepped out of his car, his mind a whirl of thoughts and suspicions. The anonymous warning and the mounting resistance had only fueled his determination. He could no longer ignore the possibility that there were forces actively working to obscure the truth. Thomas had spent the previous night poring over the documents he'd recovered from Maria's attic, connecting fragments of old letters and records. One letter in particular stood out, a detailed account from someone who had witnessed the events surrounding the photograph. The details hinted at a conspiracy that spanned generations, a secret that involved both his family and Maria's. Today, he was visiting a historian he had managed to contact, a specialist in local history and genealogy who had agreed to meet him in a secluded library. The historian, Dr. Evelyn Collins, had been cautious in her communication, wary of the potential repercussions of discussing sensitive historical secrets. The library was an old building, its architecture a blend of classical elegance and dusty nostalgia. As Thomas entered, the musty scent of old books and parchment greeted him. Dr. Collins awaited him at a large oak table, surrounded by stacks of faded documents and ancient records. Her eyes, sharp and inquisitive, met his with a mix of curiosity and concern. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice low and measured, "you mentioned you have uncovered something significant. What exactly are you looking for?" Thomas placed the letters and documents on the table, carefully arranging them. "I've discovered a connection between my family and a family named Ramirez. There's an old photograph that ties us together, but the implications go beyond a mere coincidence. I believe there's a hidden history here, one that someone is desperate to keep buried." Dr. Collins studied the documents with a furrowed brow. "Let's see what we can find," she said, her tone resolute. She began to examine the papers, her fingers tracing over the faded ink. "These records are intriguing. They suggest a story of deception and betrayal that reaches far beyond what's written here." Hours passed as they delved into the documents. Dr. Collins's expertise uncovered patterns and connections that Thomas had missed. The letters spoke of a long-standing feud between two families, a betrayal that had led to a secret agreement designed to erase any trace of the truth. It became evident that the photograph was not just a family relic. It was a symbol of a broken promise and a concealed legacy. Dr. Collins handed Thomas a document that made his heart race. It was a legal agreement from decades ago, detailing the terms of a settlement that involved both the Carter and Ramirez families. The agreement mentioned a hidden inheritance and a vow to keep the past secret. The terms were clear. The truth was to remain buried, and any attempt to uncover it was to be thwarted. Thomas's mind reeled as he processed the implications. The resistance he had faced, the threats, and the attempts to obstruct his investigation all made sense now. There was a concerted effort to suppress the truth, to ensure that the past remained hidden. The emerging truth was more than he had anticipated. It was a revelation that challenged everything he knew about his family and the Ramirez family. Determined to act on this new information, Thomas prepared to return to Maria. The emerging truth had shifted the stakes, revealing a deeper layer of deceit and manipulation. The transition to the next chapter was clear. Thomas's quest for the truth had reached a pivotal moment, and the path ahead was fraught with revelations that would reshape his understanding of his past and present. As he left the library, The weight of the emerging truth pressed heavily on his shoulders. The journey had taken a dramatic turn, and the search for answers was far from over. The secrets of the past were coming to light, and the story was about to unfold in ways Thomas could never have imagined. The sun was setting as Thomas Carter arrived at Maria Ramirez's modest home, the sky painted with shades of orange and purple. The day had been a whirlwind of discovery and tension, and Thomas knew that the time had come for a crucial conversation. The emerging truth had uncovered a web of deception and hidden motives, and he needed to address these head-on. Maria opened the door with a wary expression, her eyes reflecting the fatigue of recent events. "Mr. Carter, you look like you've been through a lot today," she said, stepping aside to let him in. Thomas offered a tight smile, his mind focused on the task ahead. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "I've uncovered something significant, and it's crucial that we discuss it." Inside, the living room was dimly lit, casting long shadows across the walls. Maria led Thomas to the sofa, where they both sat down, the weight of the moment hanging heavily in the air. Lily was asleep in a nearby crib, her peaceful presence a stark contrast to the storm brewing between them. Thomas began to recount the details of his findings, laying out the documents on the coffee table. "The investigation has revealed a conspiracy that involves both our families. The legal agreement I found indicates that our families were bound by a secret arrangement, a pact to keep certain truths hidden." Maria's face grew pale as she listened. "What does this mean for us?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and confusion. Thomas looked her in the eye, his expression serious. "It means that the secrets we're uncovering are more dangerous than we thought. Someone has gone to great lengths to ensure these truths remain buried, and the resistance we've faced is just the beginning." Maria's hands clenched nervously. "But why would they want to keep this hidden? What are they afraid of?" Thomas took a deep breath. "I suspect it's because the truth could unravel a significant part of our history and change everything we know about our families. The consequences of exposing this secret could be profound, and it's clear that there are powerful interests trying to prevent us from digging further." Maria's eyes were filled with uncertainty as she absorbed the implications. "What do we do now? How do we proceed without putting ourselves in danger?" Before Thomas could respond, there was a sudden knock at the door. Both of them tensed, the tension in the room palpable. Thomas exchanged a concerned glance with Maria. "Stay here," he whispered, rising to answer the door. He opened it to find a stern-looking man in a dark suit. The man's eyes were cold and calculating, and his presence radiated an unsettling authority. "Mr. Carter," the man said, his voice clipped. "We need to talk." Thomas's heart raced as he gestured for the man to come in. "Who are you?" The man introduced himself as a private investigator hired by an anonymous client, with the sole purpose of monitoring Thomas's investigation. "You've been delving into matters that are beyond your understanding," the investigator said, his tone menacing. "It's in your best interest to cease your efforts immediately." Thomas's mind raced. The investigator's presence was a clear indication that the situation was escalating. "What exactly are you threatening?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. The investigator's eyes narrowed. "I'm not here to make threats. I'm here to warn you. The truth you're seeking is dangerous, and pursuing it could have severe consequences. Consider this your final warning." With that, the investigator turned and left, leaving Thomas and Maria in a state of unease. Thomas closed the door and turned back to Maria, who was now standing, her face etched with worry. "This is bigger than we thought," Thomas said, his voice filled with resolve. "We need to decide whether we're willing to face the risks to uncover the truth. It's a difficult choice, but we have to consider the implications of our actions." Maria nodded, her expression conflicted. "I want to know the truth, but I also want to protect Lily and myself. What if the cost is too high?" Thomas placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We have to weigh the risks and decide if the truth is worth the potential danger. It's a dilemma that requires careful consideration." As the evening grew darker, the weight of their decision settled heavily on their shoulders. The confrontation with the private investigator had underscored the gravity of their situation. The path ahead was fraught with challenges and difficult choices, and the next chapter of their journey would demand courage and resolve as they faced the consequences of their pursuit of the truth. The transition to the next chapter was clear. The dilemmas and confrontations they faced had intensified the stakes, and their decision to proceed or retreat would shape the future of their investigation. The story was reaching a critical juncture, and the choices they made would determine the course of their quest for the truth. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly as Thomas Carter sat in his dimly lit office, the shadows stretching long across the room. The air was thick with tension, his mind racing with the weight of recent events. The private investigator's warning had left him on edge, and the difficult decision of whether to continue his investigation weighed heavily on him. Thomas glanced at the documents scattered across his desk, the evidence of a conspiracy that seemed to grow more complex with every passing day. He knew that the truth was tantalizingly close, but the risk of pursuing it had never been higher. The consequences were real and dangerous, not just for him, but for Maria and her daughter as well. Just as he was about to dive back into his research, his phone rang, breaking the silence. The caller ID showed Maria's name, and Thomas's pulse quickened. He answered the call, his voice laced with concern. "Maria? What's wrong?" Maria's voice was shaky, filled with panic. "Mr. Carter, I need your help. Something's happened. There's been an intrusion at my home. Someone broke in." Thomas's heart sank. "Are you and Lily all right?" "Yes, we're okay," Maria said, but her voice was strained. "But they went through everything. They must have been looking for something. I don't know what they found, but I'm scared." Thomas's mind raced. This was the breaking point, an unmistakable sign that their investigation had triggered dangerous reactions. "I'm coming over right now. Stay where you are and lock the doors." Thomas arrived at Maria's house within minutes. The front door was ajar, and the living room was a mess. Furniture overturned, drawers pulled open, and papers scattered everywhere. Maria and Lily were huddled in a corner, their faces pale with fear. "What did they take?" Thomas asked, trying to keep his voice calm despite the chaos around them. Maria shook her head. "I don't know. They didn't seem interested in taking anything specific. It's like they were just searching for any evidence that could lead them to us." Thomas looked around the room, his mind racing. The intrusion was a stark reminder of the stakes they were dealing with. Whoever was behind this was desperate to keep the truth hidden, and their methods were becoming increasingly aggressive. "I'm going to check for any clues," Thomas said, starting to sift through the mess. He carefully examined the disrupted papers and furniture, looking for anything that might indicate who had been there or what they had been searching for. As he worked, Maria's anxiety was palpable. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can't stay here like this." Thomas glanced at her, seeing the fear in her eyes. "We need to find a safe place for you and Lily. We should contact the authorities, but we also need to stay cautious. There's a lot more at stake here than we initially thought." While Maria made arrangements for a temporary place to stay, Thomas continued to investigate the scene. Among the scattered papers, he found a small, enigmatic note tucked inside a drawer. The note was handwritten and simply read, "The truth will come at a price." The cryptic message sent a chill down his spine. It was a clear warning that the pursuit of the truth would not be without significant consequences. The breaking point had been reached, and the path forward was fraught with peril. Thomas joined Maria as she prepared to leave, ensuring that everything was in order. They drove in silence, each lost in their thoughts, the gravity of the situation settling in. The intrusion had marked a critical juncture in their quest, a moment where the risks were undeniable and the resolve to uncover the truth was put to the ultimate test. As they reached the safe house, the transition to the next chapter was evident. The breaking point had elevated the stakes, and the investigation had entered a new phase of intense danger and uncertainty. Thomas and Maria faced a future where their choices would determine not only their own fates but also the resolution of the hidden truths that had brought them to this precarious moment. The night was still and cold as Thomas Carter and Maria Ramirez huddled in the dimly lit safe house. The cozy room, once a refuge from the chaos, now felt stifling under the weight of their predicament. Thomas sat at the small wooden table, his eyes scanning over the documents they had salvaged. The recent events had escalated their investigation into a high-stakes game where the cost of uncovering the truth had never been so palpable. Maria sat across from him, her fingers nervously twisting a threadbare scarf. Lily slept peacefully in a crib nearby, her innocent presence a stark contrast to the tension that filled the room. The intrusion had intensified their resolve to uncover the truth, but it had also brought to light the harsh reality of their situation. They were up against a powerful adversary, and the danger was growing more imminent. Thomas broke the silence. "We need to move forward. We've gathered all this evidence, but we haven't yet fully understood what it all means. There's something we're missing." Maria nodded, her face set in determination. "What's the next step? How do we make sense of everything we've uncovered?" Thomas pulled out the cryptic note he had found during the intrusion. "This note is a direct threat. It's telling us that the truth will come at a price. I believe it's time to confront the central mystery. What exactly are we up against?" Maria's eyes widened as Thomas spoke. "You think there's more to it than we realize?" "Yes," Thomas said. "I suspect there's a deeper layer to this conspiracy, one that involves not just our families but a larger network of influence and power. We need to uncover this layer to understand what kind of price we're being asked to pay." With renewed purpose, Thomas and Maria began to piece together the evidence they had. They cross-referenced the documents, connecting dates, names, and events. Hours passed as they worked in tandem, their frustration giving way to moments of clarity. Slowly, the puzzle began to form a coherent picture. The breakthrough came when they discovered a series of financial transactions hidden within the documents. These transactions traced back to a secretive foundation linked to both their families. The foundation had been funding various projects under the guise of philanthropy, but the records suggested that these projects were fronts for more nefarious activities. "This foundation," Thomas said, his voice tinged with urgency, "it's the key. It's been financing operations to suppress the truth and manipulate events to their advantage." Maria's eyes were wide with realization. But who's behind it? Who stands to gain from all this secrecy? Thomas shook his head, frustration evident. "That's the next piece of the puzzle. We need to trace the foundation's board members and see who holds the real power." As they continued their investigation, the truth started to reveal itself. The foundation was controlled by a powerful figure from Thomas's past, someone he had once trusted but who had since become a shadowy figure in the background. This individual had orchestrated the conspiracy to protect their own interests, manipulating events to keep the truth buried. The revelation hit Thomas hard. It wasn't just about uncovering hidden truths. It was about confronting someone he had admired and respected. The emotional toll was immense, and the sacrifices they would need to make became increasingly apparent. Maria placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "We're getting close, but we need to be prepared for the cost. What will we sacrifice to expose the truth?" Thomas looked at her, his expression conflicted. "The cost may be more than we anticipated. It could mean personal losses, and possibly even danger to those we care about." Maria nodded, her resolve strengthening. "We've come this far. We owe it to ourselves and to those who are affected by this deception to see it through. But we must be strategic and prepared for whatever comes next." With a heavy heart, Thomas and Maria made their final preparations. The path ahead was fraught with challenges, and the sacrifices they faced would test their courage and commitment. They were on the brink of uncovering the ultimate truth, but they knew that it would come with a price that neither of them could fully predict. As they concluded their preparations, the transition to the next chapter was clear. The revelation of the powerful figure behind the conspiracy and the realization of the sacrifices required set the stage for a confrontation that would determine the ultimate fate of their quest for the truth. The stakes had never been higher, and the story was moving toward a critical and dramatic climax. The sun had barely risen when Thomas Carter and Maria Ramirez arrived at the old, imposing building that housed the secretive foundation. The morning light filtered through the clouds, casting a somber glow over their determined faces. They knew today was the day they would confront the hidden power behind the conspiracy. A confrontation that would test every ounce of their courage and resolve. Thomas glanced at Maria, his eyes reflecting a mix of exhaustion and resolve. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, his voice steady despite the tension in his shoulders. Maria nodded, her face set in determination. "We have to do this. For Lily. For everyone who's been affected by this deception." Together, they approached the entrance of the building, a formidable structure that seemed to loom over them. The heavy doors creaked open as they stepped inside, their footsteps echoing off the marble floors. The lobby was sleek and polished, a stark contrast to the chaos that had brought them here. They were greeted by a stern-faced receptionist who eyed them with suspicion. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, her tone clipped. Thomas took a deep breath, stepping forward. "We have a meeting with Mr. Richard Davenport. It's urgent." The receptionist's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Davenport is a busy man. Do you have an appointment?" "We don't," Maria interjected, her voice firm. "But it's critical that we speak with him now." The receptionist hesitated, glancing at her computer screen. After a moment, she picked up the phone and dialed a number. Thomas and Maria exchanged a glance, knowing that gaining access to Davenport would be the first step in overcoming the significant obstacle they faced. Moments later, they were escorted to a plush, executive office on the top floor. The room was adorned with expensive art and luxurious furnishings, a testament to Davenport's immense wealth and power. Richard Davenport, a distinguished-looking man in his late 50s, sat behind a massive desk, his expression a mix of curiosity and disdain. "Mr. Carter, Ms. Ramirez," Davenport said, his voice smooth but guarded. "What brings you here unannounced?" Thomas stepped forward, holding up a folder. "We have evidence of your involvement in the conspiracy. We know about the secret projects funded through your foundation and the lengths you've gone to cover it up." Davenport's expression hardened. "You think you can come in here and accuse me of wrongdoing without proof?" Thomas opened the folder, spreading out documents and financial records. "We've traced the funding, and it all leads back to you. We know about the manipulation, the cover-ups, and the damage it's caused." Davenport's eyes flicked over the documents, and for a brief moment, a flicker of unease crossed his face. "You're playing a dangerous game. The influence I hold extends far beyond this office." Maria stepped forward, her voice steady. "We're not afraid of your threats. We're here to expose the truth, no matter what it costs." Davenport leaned back in his chair, his gaze cold. "You've underestimated the power of what you're dealing with. There are forces at play that you can't even begin to comprehend." As the conversation escalated, Davenport's demeanor shifted from defensive to menacing. He attempted to intimidate Thomas and Maria, using his influence to undermine their resolve. But they stood firm, their determination unshaken. Just as the confrontation reached its peak, the office doors burst open, and a security team entered, their presence a clear sign that Davenport was prepared for any attempt to expose his secrets. Thomas and Maria braced themselves for what was to come, knowing that this was the moment of truth. Davenport's face twisted into a smirk. "You think you can win this battle? You're about to find out what true power means." Thomas and Maria were swiftly escorted out of the building, their attempt to confront Davenport thwarted. As they left, the realization of the obstacle they faced set in. The confrontation had been a test of their resolve, and while they had been temporarily defeated, their determination to uncover the truth remained unwavering. Back at their temporary safe house, the atmosphere was heavy with disappointment. The encounter with Davenport had proven that the path ahead was fraught with immense challenges, but it had also strengthened their resolve to push forward. The obstacle had only intensified their commitment to exposing the truth and bringing justice to light. As they regrouped, the next steps in their quest became clear. They needed to find alternative methods to uncover the truth and ensure that their efforts to overcome the obstacles were not in vain. The journey was far from over, and the fight to bring the conspiracy into the light would continue. With renewed determination, Thomas and Maria prepared for the next phase of their investigation, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The transition to the final chapter was set, and the stakes had never been higher. The struggle to overcome the obstacle had only heightened their resolve, and they were prepared to confront the final battle for justice. The city lay in a quiet embrace as dawn broke, casting a golden hue over the skyline. Thomas Carter and Maria Ramirez sat on a park bench overlooking the river, their expressions reflecting both exhaustion and hope. The struggle had been grueling, and the final confrontation with Richard Davenport had taken its toll. But the air was different now, filled with the promise of a fresh start. Thomas sighed deeply, watching the river's gentle flow. "It's strange," he said softly, "how the calm after a storm can feel both peaceful and unsettling." Maria looked at him, her face softened by a small, relieved smile. "It's the calm that gives us time to reflect on what we've been through, to think about how far we've come and what we've lost and gained along the way." They had finally succeeded in exposing the conspiracy. The Foundation's nefarious activities were now public knowledge, and Richard Davenport faced the consequences of his actions. The news had spread, and the weight of secrecy that had hung over them for so long had been lifted. Yet, despite their victory, there was an undeniable sense of melancholy in the air. As they sat in the park, memories of their journey flashed through their minds. The early days of investigation, the late-night strategy sessions, and the moments of fear and doubt, they had all led to this point. The truth had come to light, but the personal sacrifices they had made were still fresh. "I keep thinking about how different things could have been," Thomas said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "If we hadn't taken this path, if we had chosen to stay silent." Maria interrupted gently, "But we didn't. We chose to fight for what's right, even when it meant facing the darkest parts of our past and the most daunting obstacles. That choice has changed us." Thomas nodded. "You're right. We've learned so much about ourselves and about each other. We've faced fears we didn't know we had and discovered strengths we didn't know existed." Maria looked down at the small locket she wore around her neck, a symbol of her journey and the loved ones who had supported her. "It's hard to see it now, but maybe all these challenges were meant to lead us to this moment of clarity, to a new beginning." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the park became more vibrant. Families strolled by, children played, and the city seemed to hum with renewed energy. It was a stark contrast to the shadows that had dominated their lives for so long. The world was moving on, and so were Thomas and Maria. "I've been thinking," Maria said, turning to Thomas with a thoughtful expression, "about what comes next. We've exposed the truth, but we still have a lot of work to do. There are people who need support, and there are lessons to be learned from everything we've been through." Thomas's eyes met hers. A spark of determination rekindled. "We've always believed in making a difference, in fighting for justice. Now it's time to use what we've learned to help others, to ensure that the sacrifices we've made lead to meaningful change." They both sat in reflective silence, absorbing the significance of their conversation. The city around them was a reminder of the opportunities that lay ahead. Their personal battles were over, but the fight for justice and the quest for a better world continued. They had the chance to rebuild, to forge new paths, and to contribute to a future shaped by their experiences. As the morning sun warmed their faces, they stood up from the bench, a renewed sense of purpose guiding their steps. They knew that the journey was far from finished, but they were ready to face whatever came next with the same courage and resilience that had carried them through the darkest times. Thomas and Maria walked away from the park, their hearts lighter and their spirits invigorated. The transition from their arduous struggle to a new beginning was marked by a sense of hope and possibility. The final chapter of their journey had come to a close, but a new chapter awaited. A chapter where they would continue to make a difference, driven by the lessons they had learned and the strength they had gained. Click on the video being recommended to you now.